Hello, and welcome back to a very special third episode of RAW Sport Quaran-Stream. I'm your host and head of sport, Josh Sim. We've got a really special episode today, and it's our first of the interviews that we've got, and we're looking, obviously, with sport not going on right now, we're going to try and get more and more. We're going to try and get a few interviews on just to get some content out. But yeah, we've got a special one, like I said. We've got a special guest, and I'll bring him on in a sec. But it's going to work. First half, hello to those who are here for the journalism aspect, and also hello to those who are here for the Bundesliga aspect. So we've got, we'll bring him on now. We've got a freelance football journalist joining us. He's written for Forbes and Sky Sports in the past. He currently he writes for Fußballstat, and also this is Anfield. So we've got Chris Williams, who should be on with me now. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Josh. How are you?
Good, thanks. So again, thank you so much for giving your time and coming on.
No worries.
How have you been during this whole weird situation?
Yeah, it has been a weird situation. Yeah, I've been all right. I'm healthy. My family are healthy. My friends are healthy. So got no problems on that. Just obviously work-wise, there's nothing going on. So as I'm sure we'll discuss, freelance is a bit of a hazardous occupation. So when there's no games on, freelancers are the first to go. So yeah, unfortunately, I think you call it in between jobs at the minute. But once football comes back, hopefully should be absolutely fine.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll kick it off. I'll just make it clear. We're going to start a journalism Q&A. I've got some broader questions to ask, and hopefully those who are watching might want to chip in as well with questions of their own. And I'll quickly just say, send in your questions, guys. Comment along. We can bring it up. We'll be able to bring up the questions onto the screen, and then we'll have a look and be able to answer them ourselves. And yeah, so the first question I've got really, Chris, is what was it that kind of drew you to journalism? Obviously, you've you studied journalism and radio production at University of Liverpool College. What was it? Did you know that was something that you wanted to do? Or was it kind of just something that just you kind of just fell into place and you kind of just went with it, really?
Yes, it's a good question. I think you sort of know you want to be involved in writing in some aspects. So I was always quite a creative writer, even in high school. English teacher would used to say that I was a very creative writer, and it's something that I really took a lot of interest in. And what really forced me into journalism was I started as a music journalist. So that's what I specialised in when I was at college, and I was quite fortunate at the time because it was the explosion of guitar bands in the Northwest. I was in Liverpool, so I was able to go to college and cover the likes of Cast, the Lars, Oasis, all of those like local Northwest bands. The Farm, there's so many going all the way back. But yeah, that's what got me into it, and that's what got me into the taste for writing, really.
Yeah, do you have any favorite memories from the whole music scene back then? Is there anything that kind of stands out when you think about it?
Yeah, there's so many. I ended up interviewing a band. I don't know if you might have heard of them, but if there's any indie kids out there might remember a band called Manson. They're from Chester. I had them round my flat,
okay.
And they just ended up jamming while I was interviewing. That was quite cool. I bumped into the Chemical Brothers in Cream, and asked them if I could chat to them at some point, swap numbers, and then did an interview with them. So I think probably the Chemical Brothers was the biggest time, and getting backstage with Paul Oakenfold at Cream as well. I mean, they've just some things that, yeah. I mean, I suppose you can equate it to now going and interviewing football players. Like for the Atletico Madrid game in Madrid, I interviewed Van Dijk afterwards, and they're special times. And I look back over those mid to late 90s, and yeah, there was some special music times and chilling and hanging with rock stars, and it is quite surreal. And it even is surreal looking back if you see him on TV now and think, oh Christ, I was in a flat with him, or I interviewed her, etc. Yeah, it's quite fortunate, I think.
Yeah. obviously you're I think we mentioned it at the top of the show, you're a freelancer. How do you manage kind of freelancing, ensuring there's a constant workload that you've got on your plate? Obviously we mentioned, you've written for Forbes, Sky Sports News, you now write for Football Start and this is Anfield as well. What is it like to kind of try and keep a constant workflow going?
Yeah, it is a bit of a challenge, especially when you're just starting out. It is a challenge, and I was lucky enough to write a blog that was picked up by a guy called Will Tidy, who at the time worked for Bleacher Report, as it was then, BR Football as it is now. And they gave me a position covering Liverpool with BR. That was like quite a fortunate aspect. And from there, this is Anfield. And from there, I specialised in German football. And when Jurgen Klopp moved over, that made it a little bit easier because everybody wanted to know about German football. And then people approach you, can you write for us? Will you write for us? And yeah, it's more, I think I've been very lucky. I've met the right people at the right time. I know there's a lot of writers out there, some who are a lot better than me, who are struggling to get their work published. It is all about networking, who you know and what you know comes into it a little bit. But yeah, I've been quite lucky. But yeah, it is a stretch. It's a constant challenge. Under normal circumstances, it's a challenge. I think as we come out of this, it'll be a pretty big challenge. But yeah, you've just got to get out and get your work out there. And it's just pitching, really, and pitching ideas to editors. And it can be rewarding. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating if you pitch to an editor and they say, we're not really in the market for that at the moment. And then you see their staff writers write something on it in a couple of days' time. That can be a bit of a pain. But yeah. It's challenging. But the more work you get and the more lucky you are for other people to then approach you.
Yeah, I mean, when you're pitching, I guess, is it mainly long form pieces that you're pitching on maybe topics that are topical, or maybe even stuff that are off the mainstream? I guess, like, is that what you're kind of pitching?
Long form, you've got to really choose your outlets for that, because there's not many. I mean, a lot of the Google Analytics into journalism show that most readers have got about a 4-minute concentration span. So about 4 minutes, you're looking at somewhere 600 to 800 words. So that would be a normal article. Long form would be 3,000 word plus for me. 1,500 is probably medium form, but yeah, long form is 3,000 word. Something that you'll see in the Athletic. It's a real niche market for that. So I don't mind doing long form, but you can make a lot more money doing short form.
Yeah. I guess, what would you recommend to aspiring journalists in terms of what, I mean, you mentioned, like, most people in the market for medium short form writers. Is that what people should be practicing a lot more? Is that something that, is that something where, you can get more out of? I think that's the right way of saying it. Yeah,
I understand what you mean. I mean, my advice would be, don't specialize in one particular area. So no matter what journalism you want to follow, if it's sports journalism, if it's golf or rugby or cricket or football, don't just tie yourself down to, I only write 1,500 to 3,000 words, because some people will want shorter than that. Just try and get as much experience as you can. I mean, long form is a real art form. We've got a lot of time for the guys at the Athletic who write some exceptionally good long form pieces. It's hard to be able to tell a story for that length of time and to keep people interested. So that's a real art form. But then news is a real art form, because brevity is key on that. You need to get everything over in the shortest time possible. People don't want to read 1,000 words of news. They want to read somewhere between 200 and 400 words of news. So just practice. And if you want to work for Sky Sports and have a high bar there, then the best thing you can do is read everything that Sky Sports put out, because then you'll get familiar with their house style. And that's the key thing, really. It's getting used to house styles. Everywhere is different. Sky have got a very precise house style, differs exceptionally from Forbes Business, who I've written for. So you need to be able to be flexible. But yeah, just practice. And just, anyone that wants to be a journalist, be it politics or sports or whatever, no is the most common word you'll ever hear. So don't get put off by it. If you pitch an idea and someone says no, don't let it get disheartened. Just keep pitching it and ask for feedback all the time. Always get feedback on your articles. It's no good just an editor going, yeah, that's great, thanks. Ask them why it was good. How could it have been better? What more would they like to see? So just trying to expand your knowledge all the time really would be my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about feedback. Is that a lesson you kind of learned along the way? Is that kind of, what other stuff have you kind of picked up along the way as you've kind of gotten further into your journalism career?
Yeah, I mean, always asking for feedback, especially when you're starting out. Any editor that you work for will know that you're new because you'll have chatted to them firsthand, so they'll know what experience you've got. So they should hopefully try and mentor you a bit. They should just throw you in the deep end and let you get on with it. But yeah, ask for feedback, because it doesn't matter if you've been writing 1 year or 20, 30 years, there's always stuff you can learn. So ask for that feedback. That's probably the key thing, and ask for it as you go along, and learn from other writers, speak to other journalists. I mean, I'm more than happy to chat to you guys, but likewise, people who I look up to will more than, I mean, Henry Winter's a fantastic journalist. Not only is he one of the best writers at the Times, but if you're at a match and he's got a spare moment, he's the type of guy who'll speak to you and give you a little bit of advice. So yeah, just introduce yourself and just get as many contacts as you can would be my biggest advice, really.
Yeah. What's kind of the most memorable? Do you have any pieces that stand out? Do you have any pieces that you've done that you're really like particularly proud of, should we say, and that ones they kind of remember?
Yeah, I mean, on a normal day-to-day basis, I either cover matches, opinion pieces, or a little bit of news. But when I was working with Forbes, I had a real good opportunity to, cut my own way. And I did an interview last month with Jordan Gard from the Women's Sports Association, highlighting the disparities between women footballers and male footballers, especially in this time. That was a real pleasure to be able to bring that, to a business audience. I did a piece with a company called Connexon, who've put a chip inside the Bundesliga ball. So there's a real small microchip in there. And to be able to report on that, the DFL picked that up and pushed it worldwide. So it's a pretty proud thing. But I suppose I would say that you have to be proud of everything that you put out. You can't put anything out half-hearted or a little bit lazy. It needs to be 100% for everything. But yeah, I mean, when you interview players, that's always a special. Or you interview a manager or a coach, or even someone that just works at the club and can give you a different angle. So I did a piece on Leicester City once and about their grass. I spoke to their groundsman, and that was a real good insight, because he's obviously a key specialist in that area, and you get to learn a little bit of things as you go on. But proudest wise, I would probably say it's the piece I did pretty much second to last, which was trying to highlight the differences in women's football and how they've tried to respond to this COVID-19 situation.
Yeah, and obviously we'll touch upon football news in a bit. Oh goodness, I had a question and it's just in my memory. Will it come back? I don't know. I'm trying to think of it, but I'll get back to it. I did have one. But what was it, when you transitioned from music journalism to football journalism, I mean, there's obviously a lot of transferable skills in terms of writing stuff, but was there, when you covering a gig to covering a game, did you find any transition? Like, were there any issues at all? Was it quite seamless?
I know, I'd say it was pretty seamless. Now, whether anybody that read anything would agree with that, it is a little bit different, but I think you need to have a passion. So, when I was younger, I still got a real passion for music, but when I was like 18, 19, I had a real passion for music, and going out and maybe listening to music and listening to albums and gigs and trying to give them, a write-up that I thought other people would want to hear. And pretty much that's the same with football. You're telling a story, and it's how you tell that story. And I always think to myself, would I want to read this? And if I wouldn't want to read it, then there's pretty much no point in writing it, because you're trying to make it a story that someone can follow and go, actually, that I really enjoyed that. I learned something from it. Or I didn't particularly think of it that way. So when you're writing about football, so you give an appreciation of the 90 minutes that have just gone on. You will watch a match different the way I do. You'll get a press box full of journalists, and every single match report will be different. And I think that's the beauty of it, really.
Yeah. I've just remembered what I was going to ask. You mentioned, I think I mentioned it. You do Oh, actually, no, I don't think I did. You contribute to the Gegenpressing podcast.
Yeah.
And obviously podcasts are becoming more and more popular in the media landscape. Do you find that, if you're an aspiring journalist, do you reckon having that kind of versatility to kind of play around with different media layouts and outlets, that would surely benefit your career?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm glad you remember that question because it's a fabulous question. So years ago, and not that far, so let's go back 5 or 6 years, I would have been a writer. There's no space for that anymore in today's modern writing or today's modern journalism. You need to be able to edit video. You need to be able to look after audio. You need to be able to do some sort of photo collaboration. So can you do photo manipulation on Photoshop? Can you use Audition? Can you use Premiere Pro? Not just can you write. No one's looking for a writer these days. You need to be able to do a little bit. I mean, obviously, if you're a full-blown journalist like I am, then writing's your bread and butter. But you still need to be able to have those other skills in your back pocket should you need them, because it's a competitive marketplace at the moment. And if you can say, I can just write, I can just do shorthand and write, that's it, then someone can do your job, but they can also help out the outlet by being able to do some of the photo skills for it, or maybe even recording a video at the match and then editing it and sticking it up. If you look before football finished, most journalists these days were doing some sort of video content after the match that was going on social media. They will record that and edit themselves on their laptops or MacBooks and then push it out. So the days of just being a writer, I mean, years and years ago, journalists used to phone their match reports in, and there'd be an intern on the other end of the phone who would write it up and type it up, and that's how it got in the paper. Those days are well gone. You need to have a variety of skills under your belt, really.
Yeah, and with now being the 21st century and kind of access to players has never been as close as it's been. Do you envisage that you mentioned you talked to Virgil van Dijk post game at the Atletico game? Do you reckon access, these kind of like, I don't know if you've watched American sports, but obviously they do like locker room chats, like they literally are right in the face of the player post game. Do you reckon that's going to be something we see more often from especially, well, I mean, that's more sports journalists, but do you reckon that's something we're going to see more often in the future?
In sports, yeah. If we look at how sports is going to have to come back at some point, because the economy is going to recover. People are going to start going back to work. If you look at Germany now, shops are open. You can go and buy a pair of trainers in Berlin if you want. So non-essential people will go back to work, and unless you're covering COVID-19 stories, you are a non-essential worker as a journalist. And sports will come back, and it's going to be slightly different, because if you listen to everybody that matters scientist-wise, you're not going to see crowds at Formula One. You're not going to see crowds at football. You're not going to see crowds at cricket, darts. Golf will be played behind closed doors. They're going to have to look at different ways to capture people's attention. So what you've just described there, locker room chats that they have in the States, that might become something that broadcasters are going to have a look at. But of course, it all matters on what this social distancing is going to be, how far away a player is going to be. Should the Premier League come back, there'll be no mix zone, there'll be no open press conferences. So sports broadcasting is going to have to learn on the cuff very, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think it was the Telegraph who had this report about how apparently there's a plan about how many people are going to be allowed at a game, and they had like 28 written journalists or something was included. And to me, I don't know what you thought of it, but it seems that's not going to be something that's realistic to have 28 or so journalists who could be writing it up from home. Like to me, it's just, I don't know. I put it now to you to kind of just share your thoughts on that, but to me, it just seemed unrealistic.
Yeah, I mean, without trying to do myself out of a job, I think it is a bit unrealistic. If you look at the DFL proposal for the Bundesliga to come back, I think they've capped it at 10 journalists per match day. You could probably argue that that's too much, because don't forget that doesn't include club media. So, for instance, a game as in at Germany at the start of the season, I think Borussia Dortmund took 5 media personnel to Union Berlin, who also had 5. So there's 10 journalists on site already, or 10 media professionals on site. I think 26, 28, whatever it was, that graphic showed is a little bit too much. But the problem that the Premier League has, and the EFL as well, is that they have a management company that looks after their accreditations, Dataco Football Limited, and everybody has accreditation. So who do they start saying no to? So do they start saying no to the Athletic? Sorry, you can't come. Do they say no to the Telegraph? You can't come. No to the Times?
Yeah.
Who do they say no to? And these 28 people or 26 people that they've accounted for will normally be the number of outlets they'll go for. So whether they do that, I'm pretty sure that some outlets will be happy to let their writers do it. If we believe what we're reading, all matches are going to be televised. So pretty much, you can do it from home. Our outlet's going to want to be paying their staff to go, because journalists at main outlets, they don't pay for their train ticket there, they don't pay to park there. It all comes from the outlet and how much money they're making from advertising. So, I mean, realistically, I think that 26 number will be cut in half. Because certain outlets won't send as many. So the Telegraph can quite easily send 3 or 4 of its writers to a top game. You'll probably find that they'll just send 1 when football comes back. So it's going to be a challenge for Dataco to say who goes, who doesn't go. I think that's why they've included everybody at the moment, because they don't really know how they're going to trim it down. Yeah,
I'm just going to bring in Joe Spagnoli, our Deputy Head of Sport, because I think Joe's got a few questions as well about journalism. Hi, Joe.
Hello there. I've been just casually watching this behind the scenes. I had a question because I've done a little bit of amateur sports journalism, but also music journalism as well. And I find like the connection between the two and the fact that you move from one to the other really, really fascinating. When you're writing these quote unquote opinion pieces for sports, because of course that's an umbrella term, it could apply to basically anything. Do you have a preference when you're for writing either positive ones or negative ones? Do you find writing one particular tone more fun than the other?
It all depends on the outlet. So they will set the tone really. I would say I try to be balanced, but if it's a negative piece, so if you're covering one particular club and they've had a really poor game, or they've done something in the media that maybe they shouldn't, then to try and balance out a positive that's already a negative, I think people would see through that. So it's just about being fair. I mean, me personally, I like to do a balance report. Because I think that is the fairest, but I think everybody will know that if you write something negative, that gets a lot more interaction than anything ever you'll do that's positive. You just need to see the reactions, not just on social media, but on comments pages when negative stuff's put out. I think the most fun thing I like doing is transfer opinion pieces, because everybody's got an opinion on that. Whether you get a good source or not, someone will always say, no, that's not happening. And that's good to start debates. But yeah, I think it's about being fair and also about being responsible. And I think maybe that might have been lost over the last couple of years, the responsibility of it. And people are more than happy to push out articles of their own opinion, of their own agenda, and then they will look to back that up, which can be very dangerous.
I was going to say, I've seen a trend of that kind of thing an awful lot in the last few years in this country, especially the sort of the incredibly positive reception that negative reports of clubs get. And as a second part of that question, as a former music journalist, do you think that these, again, opinion pieces are similar to when you'd say review an album or a track that a band's put out in terms of like the objective critical side of it? Or is it, as you say, more akin to balance than an opinion?
I think the music side, that is more... you can't balance it. If you think a song's bad, you think a song's bad. But someone flip side of that will say, actually, the riff in the middle of that song is epic and it's never been heard before. And you could say, well, actually, it's been on this album in the 60s or whatever. So that drives more opinion. But yeah, for gig reviews and album reviews, gigs especially, you can get a band one night and they can blow the crowd away, and the next night they have a particularly bum afternoon and it's the worst gig ever. So it depends when you catch a band really. But I mean, music journalism, it's just as opinionated as sport. But if I was to say when I was writing that maybe Cass's latest album wasn't as good as the last one, that's not going to cause any more of a stir if I say that Sadio Mane is a little bit better than Mohamed Salah. So that that will get instant reaction or feedback from both sides. So it depends on who you're writing about. I found that if you write about Arsenal or Manchester United, no matter what you say, will be right, and there'll always be someone with a criticism about it.
All right, thank you.
I actually have a question about you talked about like the kind of reaction you get to pieces, and obviously you've written for This Is Anfield, which is a site mainly for Liverpool fans. But you've also written for Forbes, which is a bit more of an audience of professionals and stuff. Do you find there's a difference between writing for a site for fans per se, a kind of a specific site where you're giving fan-driven content compared to, say, Forbes, which is more kind of business-driven content?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've written for This Is Anfield for years, and I know the guys that own that very, very well. And we've had a real good working relationship since 2011. So I know how that site works. I'm a Liverpool fan myself, so I can write it from someone who stood on the cop, and I can also write it from someone who's sat in the press box. So that gives you a little bit, maybe more of a help to write it. And when you're writing for Forbes, obviously, that goes out the window. They want to know more business side, more financial matters. The research has to be a lot better and a lot more on point. Not that it's not for football, but I can quite happily give my opinion on a Liverpool game, but I can't give my opinion on a football club CEO if I don't really research what they've done, what their incomings are, what their outgoings are. So you have to be a lot more careful. I want to use the term highbrow. The more highbrow the publication is, the better your research has to be, and the more solid you have to be on all your work. I think fan media gives you license to say what you want, really. Whereas if you're writing for a dedicated outlet or mainstream media, you've got that balance aspect that needs to be in there. You've also got to be mindful. I'm always mindful that people see me as a Liverpool fan. So if I'm critical of Newcastle or I'm critical of Sheffield United, are people going to say you're only saying that because you're a Liverpool fan? Which is where your balance has to be in, and you need to make sure that whatever you're writing is truthful, based on fact. If your opinion's based on fact, you're never in a problem. If you're just pushing out an opinion because you don't like it, then you may be straying into, I think, what we've seen lately, which are unpopular opinion videos from betting companies who are looking for interaction. And fair play to them, they get that interaction because of the videos that they put out, which isn't journalism at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you obviously see the rise of fan-driven football. Well, in terms of football, you see a lot of fan channels, YouTube channels. Arsenal Fan TV obviously being the most famous one for just generating clicks in a way as well with their opinions. What do you obviously when you write these articles, say on a particular club or player, and when you get kind of that, oh, he's a Liverpool fan reaction, is it, do you find yourself that you have to kind of just, like you said, with that balance, do you find it's worth kind of responding to, or is it kind of just like you just hope that the words kind of just speak for themselves on the...
Yeah, the last bit you said there, really. So I used to referee football a long time ago, and you're always, am I doing the right thing? Have I made the right decision? Am I saying the right thing? Pretty much it works in journalism as well. You need to be fair, but if you're fair and balanced, then no one has really got any kickback. And thankfully, I've not had that. I've covered most clubs in the UK, even Rangers and Celtic and Hearts as well, and clubs across Europe. And I do it from a completely fair and neutral position. Like, I can quite happily appreciate Arsenal playing football. I can quite happily appreciate Manchester United playing football. And just because I'm a Liverpool fan, I'm not going to start my report that Manchester United are awful. If they've got a very good side and they played very well. So I think it's all about being neutral and being balanced. Whilst I'm not afraid to say online that I'm a Liverpool fan, and my Liverpool stuff is pretty opinionated at times. I wouldn't be as opinionated about another side unless I knew it inside and out. And I think you need to be balanced. And when people see that you're fair and you're balanced, I don't think there's a problem. I've got quite good interaction with Everton fans because I've covered Everton, and I do it from a real neutral program. And if Everton are good on that particular match, then they get a report that says they're good. However, if they're poor, they'll get a poor report, but it will be based on fact, like who had a good game, who didn't have a good game, was the right substitutions made, what was the coach doing, what the tactics been before. So when you've got to be careful when you do spit words out onto a screen that they're based in fact.
Yeah, I only asked that question because obviously we see a lot more of social media, and social media has a lot to do with this, but we see a lot of backlash and reaction to people like where your sources, accusing your sources, like questioning things that you kind of that you know are facts and you try and project as facts, and yet people still want to question it. You know, you've worked. I mean, you worked as a music journalist in the 90s. Now you're a football journalist. Have you seen over like the years that have gone by, kind of this? And I don't want to bring up fake news because obviously everyone, you know, knows a lot about fake news. But do you find it a lot? You know, you're having to deal with a lot more people questioning where your sources are coming from, where's your information coming from?
Yeah, because I think 10 years ago you could say sources say, and people will go, "Oh, okay." These days it's a lot, and I think especially in the past month, and with the return of the Premier League, there's been a lot of this. A source at 3 different clubs has said we don't want to play, we want the season voided, and that's a big thing to write about. So you're going to get a lot of kickback from that, from various fans of various clubs, and they want to know who your source is. Now, obviously, you can't say who your source is because you protect your sources, and if they don't want to go on the record, you can't then throw them in the bus and go, actually, you know, it was Glenn Murray from Brighton who said it, or it was Raheem Sterling, or, you know, it was Sadio Mane, or it was Jurgen Klopp who said it, or for any, you can't just throw someone under the bus. So I can see people are getting tired of it though. And I think it ties into the mistrust of media, not just sports, but, you know, you're looking through the last elections, the BBC couldn't do right for wrong. They were either hardline right wingers or they were left wing, you know, liberalists. And depending on what your political view is, will decide on what your view on the BBC is. So I think it is hard, but I also do think, and, you know, I'm not going to accuse anybody in particular, but some writers do use sources say to maybe validate their own opinion without having to put down why it's validated. So I could quite happily write something today, and if I wanted to give it a little bit more oomph, I could say that I've spoke to 2 people in a football club that backed up my decision. Well, who have I spoke to? Could have spoke to 2 people that work in the canteen for all you know, but, you know, that wouldn't hold any weight to it. So that's why I think people get tired of sources say. And I think sources say for a transfer story is absolutely fine. But if you're dealing with something that's real key topic, and is football going to come back now, or is it going to come back next year because of COVID-19? I don't think people are going to be happy for sources say, because it sort of allows you to validate your opinion in a sort of realistic way without having to be realistic about it.
Yeah, you often find fans on, and maybe, I mean, this is, again, more specific towards football, but you often find sources say seem to be the justification for the validity of something. And it, you know, we have no idea what, they don't specify who the sources are. It's just that somehow just becomes a justification.
Yeah, I think if you're doing an article and your unnamed source is probably the biggest quote and the one that the sub will go with a headline for, you need to be able to have faced quotes in there. So one person may say this, but can you speak to someone else who's willing to go on the record to give the opposite opinion than that? Or will they go on the record and back that opinion up? Whilst I don't agree really with what Glenn Murray said the other day regards players playing, not that I don't think he's got a right to play. I think if he feels it's unsafe, he shouldn't. He also has to bear in mind that 24 hours before he said he shouldn't take a pay cut. So there's got to be a trade-off. But if he's willing to go on record and say that to the BBC, fair play to him, because had the BBC done that report and said a Premier League player says it's not safe to play, I mean, that's a very big quote for a very big story, and people aren't going to be happy until they know who said it.
Yeah. Again, I had a question in mind, but again, I've got it now.
You need some. I'm going to buy you a pen and paper and send it over.
I know. You mentioned The Athletic, and obviously they've done a series recently on pieces that they're unwritten pieces. They've called it pieces that they've you know, had the idea of writing, and maybe they were close to writing it. I don't know how much they got through it, and then in the end, it never got published. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you've got something that you've written and, you know, it's been there, and then for some reason it never got out publicly?
Yeah, I mean, that happens quite a lot. You pitch a commission, you get a commission, and then you write a report, and then you send it off to the editor, and then it's up to them whether they want to use it or not. And if maybe a story changes, or maybe that story's not really applicable anymore, then they'll quite happily drop it. But that really doesn't bother me, because I'm paid for the article whether it's published or not. So it can be frustrating. A really good piece on Marco Grujic, and would he really fit back at Liverpool? I did a lot of research for it. I spoke to a lot of people at Hertha Berlin and Liverpool, and that's never seen the light of day because football was cancelled. So it might see the light of day at some other point. Whilst it's disappointing, as a freelancer, I've received my freelance fee for it. So if that particular outlet wants to run it, that's entirely up to them now. But I think it would be frustrating had, you'd put all that time and effort into it and then you don't get paid. And, we've all got to live and eat. And that's probably the biggest thing I'd say to anybody that's watching and everybody that's on your course. It's a fine line where you've got to give your work away for free to get noticed, but don't make it a habit because it devalues the whole industry. So if you're going to end up being an intern, I think we all accept that interns will be unpaid. But if you want to start trying to write for outlets, don't let them say we can't give you any money, we can just give you exposure, because at the end of the day, the NatWest don't take exposure as payment for a mortgage. So you need to, even if you're only getting a little bit of cash, you need to be able to say, you're getting paid for it. Please don't give your work away for free, because not only will it impact you, but it impacts everybody else in the industry.
Yeah. I don't know, Joe, do you have any questions?
I did have something just off of that, actually, because I remember when football was suspended initially, one of the fears was that these bogus transfer stories were going to become more and more published every day, just as the outlets were desperate to fill the void with something. Do you think there's a chance that, it doesn't necessarily need to be trash journalism. It could be, for example, your piece on Grujic. As long as the suspension continues, do you think that more of these transfer stories that were perhaps unused at the time will see the light of day as we head towards potentially a summer transfer window?
Yeah, it's a difficult one with transfers at the moment, because I think players, and I'm pretty sure players, agents and clubs use the press to their advantage. So everything you read about a transfer story, a journalist will have got that information from one of three places. They'll have either got it from the player themselves, the player's management agency, or the club that's selling or buying. So you're only ever reporting that angle that you're offered. So I'm lucky enough to know a few people at Borussia Dortmund, and if there's any transfers coming up, I can always ask someone at Borussia Dortmund. Now, they're not going to give me their player's view. They're going to give me Borussia Dortmund's view as a club. So I will report that. But everybody needs to be mindful that there's two other parties in as well, the buying club and the player themselves. So, but as regards these transfer stories, and are we going to see more of them? It's an interesting one, because no one knows what football is going to look like. So are we going to see no transfers in the summer, or are we going to see deals agreed for starting the season after? A little bit like when Naby Keita joined Liverpool. He stayed at Leipzig for that year, but it was announced he would join the following year. I think we could see stuff like that. But transfers generate a lot of clicks, which in turn generates a lot of advertising revenue for outlets. So, you're never going to see transfer stories go away. Even if FIFA came out and said, we're not going to play football until a vaccine's introduced in 2 years' time, you would still see transfer news on a daily basis. That's something you just can't get away from.
And when it comes to unveiling these transfer stories, you say you've got contacts at Borussia Dortmund. What I've always wanted to know is how much effort or how much wearing down of these particular reliable sources that you have does it take to actually generate a transfer story? Because you say you've got contacts at the club, but I can't imagine that, unless they were particularly mischievous or they had some link to you, I can't imagine they'd be willing to give that information away easily, if that makes sense.
Oh, they're more than happy to give the information away, because at the end of the day, you're going to get that club in the news. So one of the last pieces I did for Forbes was on Sancho. Just rang up the people I know at Dortmund. I wasn't like, is he going to be sold? Because you'll never get that answer. You just
don't know.
Yeah, really don't know. But they will give you their side of it. So they're quite happily looking to offer him a new contract on an improved terms to stay for another year. So you just have to report that and then back it up with, maybe linking in other pieces that colleagues have written, and looking at statistics about Jadon Sancho, statistics about Manchester United and Chelsea and Dortmund, and where would he fit, and that's how you graft your story. But it all depends on your question. Like, you can't just ring up someone at a club and say, hey, what have you heard about this? Are you selling him? Because you'll never get that answer. It's about asking the right question, that once you get to know people, you know what they'll tell you, yes or no. So when you do approach them, you ask them on an angle that they're going to talk about, and they are quite happy to see their name in paper, as long as it's a positive. If you use your source and contacts and then write something that is derogatory based on that, those sources will dry up very quickly. It is a massive PR game for everybody. It's a PR game for the journalist. It's a PR game for the clubs, and it's a PR game for the papers, which I think is what makes it so fascinating. Because, you know, a club will say, no, he's not for sale. And then you'll speak to his agent. He'll say, actually, we've been speaking to this club and they're maybe looking at selling him, but they want 2 times over his market value, and you get another opinion there. So, yeah, it is a very interesting side. But it's always something that as soon as you've printed it, that information's out of date, because, you know, it's a business deal and they move on very quickly. So I think if you think back to the other summer, James Pearce, who's a wonderful Liverpool journalist, approached the club and was given the information that Danny Ward would be Liverpool's new number 1. 24 hours later, he was sold because they'd agreed a deal with Alisson. So that's how quickly football news moves on, because you've got someone who's fantastic as James Pearce and exceptionally well connected. You know, transfers move on so quick. The minute that was printed, the business decision had changed. So, and that's where journalists, unfortunately, get pelters on social media. You said this was going to happen, and 5 days later it didn't. Well, at the time you wrote it, that was the information you were given.
And what happens when it's the reverse? Say, I don't know if you've been in the situation, but you've got a story about someone and it doesn't present them in a good light, or the club maybe, maybe the club don't know, maybe they do know, but how does it work in terms of contacting them to let them? Do you contact them at all to let them know? Look, I've heard from so and so that so and so's done this. Do they then try and, you know, not redact the story maybe, but like, do they try and talk you out of it? How does that even work in terms of that process?
Well, a club would never talk you out of it, because I think you would then report that they tried to talk you out of it. What they'll do is they will give you, it depends what it is. So if we look at something like, did Jack Grealish take a car out and crash it under lockdown? Yeah, there was the stuff there. So when the journalists, they will have contacted Aston Villa and they'll have said, look, we've got this information, we're going to do a story. What's your comeback on it? What would you like to say to it? Okay. Now, if you don't do that, it all depends on the outlet you work for. So, for instance, when I was at Forbes, I did a story not too long ago, I think it was last month, about Kevin McCabe and their current chairman having a little bit of a fallout because of money that wasn't paid. Now, the quotes from the club were there, from Sheffield United were there, and they weren't very good looking on Mr. McCabe. But although he didn't want the story published, he still his people who look after him still gave a statement to balance out that story. I think journalists have to be very careful. If you've got a real juicy story, if you don't go to that person and say, I've got this information, would you like to respond on it? Then you could be in a whole world of trouble, because that information you have could be libelous. You know, at the very worst, it could be libelous. You know, at the very least, it could be a load of rubbish, which is why you'll often see in pieces, you know, Newcastle United were contacted, or this player was contacted, and, you know, they're yet to respond. And that does give them the avenue to do it. But if you've got a source, and they give you something that's really juicy, you know, you need to double check it with another source or with another colleague who may be able to give you another line on it. I don't think anybody that I know would steal a story off me if I went to them and said, listen, I've heard this. Have you heard anything similar? And they could say, actually, you know, I've spoken to such and such who's given me this angle on it. So, yeah, you've got to be careful, because at the end of the day, people will try and use the media to forward their own agenda, be that a club, be it a player, be it an agent. So you must always double check your sources. I mean, certain outlets in the mainstream media won't let you go to publish unless you've got, you know, a couple of angles that can qualify that statement. So it's not just one person looking to make a bit of mischief. You should any legal action come, you can say, actually, I've got 3 sources here that have shown me that this story is in fact true.
Yeah. Yeah, that bit always fascinates me, in terms of, you know, what, because again, like you said, any news is publicity essentially for a club. But when there's an incident that might not present them in a good light, yeah, it's interesting to see what they say. And maybe, you know, I imagine it's frustrating when then they tell another outlet, give more of a comprehensive kind of statement. I imagine that's quite frustrating as well, if they choose to do that, and then suddenly, you know, you've got a response that wasn't, you know, directly to yourself. It was through someone else essentially.
Well, that's just the way it is. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. A club will always favour one particular outlet or one particular journalist because they've got a really good relationship with them, and you see that. You look at the correspondence. If you just look at some of the correspondents in the Northwest, who will always get really good, interesting stories. You've got David Maddock, who works at the Mirror. You've got James Pearce, who works at the Athletic. Simon Hughes at the Athletic. You've got Don King at the Daily Mail. These are writers who clubs will contact, and if they have got a story, or they're just very well connected, and they'll be able to get a story out of nothing, or where you didn't think a story would be able to be get. And all that obviously comes with a lot of experience and a lot of networking that those guys do. But you've got to be brave to be able to do that story. And I don't mean brave as in take a chance. You've got to be able to know that you're in the right to write that story, because especially these days, people will kick back if it's a lie, or if you just made it up outright. Then you can be in a lot of trouble. And journalists these days will find themselves in court, let alone their publication that they're writing for, especially as a freelancer. So as a freelancer, if I write something and it's completely inaccurate and libelous, the outlet who print it and then get approached by will say, actually, it's one of our freelancers, and that litigation will be passed to me. So you have to be really careful to make sure that everything you write is factual.
Yeah. Look, Joe, I mean, have you got any more questions? Because I think it's been a fascinating outlook and overview of the industry and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, there was one thing tied to the idea of players always wanting the publicity. If a transfer rumor gets their name in the paper, then ultimately one party is going to be willing to speak about it. Do you ever find, or have you ever found yet, when reporting on transfers, that there are players who want to stay out of the media's eye? Potentially an older player who wants to stay at the club when there's fears that they're getting sold, or perhaps just a more, I suppose, introverted young player, just to coin that term, that doesn't want to be in the limelight at that particular point in their career?
Yeah, you'll find mostly that football players are just normal working class lads or middle class lads, depends on where they're from, where they're brought up. They're absolutely normal people. It's the people that associate themselves that will want not the publicity, but always say what agents say with a pinch of salt. If players are willing to speak to you about a move, then that's great. But players are very guarded about speaking, especially when they're under contract, because no matter where you work, if you work at McDonald's, you can't just all of a sudden say, actually, I don't like working at McDonald's, it's crap, I want to work at Burger King, because you still work there. So you've got to be careful as a players, and players are very careful about who they talk to, who they trust, because they, generations of them have been hung out to dry in the media. But yeah, you always find that players who want to move are more than happy to talk. Players who are quite happy to stay where they are, and maybe the club want to sell them, then they'll, it's not up to me, it's up to the club. Whereas if you've got a really talented player who's maybe playing at a lower league club, or a club where he thinks he can move on to and make a better living for himself and play at a higher level, they're normally willing to be a little bit more chatty. But it all depends on the player. Some players hate being in the media. Some players love it and embrace it. It depends on their personality, like in life. I mean, I'm sure you guys, and you'll have people on your course will go, I don't want to be in front of a camera because I don't like it. And you'll get other people who go, put me in front of a camera because it's what I want to do. It just all depends on your own personality.
Yeah. And what is it like when you're, I mean, and I get that we've kind of gone it more specifically into transfer stories, but obviously there are a lot more, there's a lot more instances where agents offer clubs players or something, like third party agents who are not necessarily affiliated to the player or the club. They've been contacted somehow to offer a player's services, or even in South America where you have big agencies own a percentage of a player. Famously, the Carlos Tevez story comes to mind, and the Mascherano one. What's it like kind of, having to report on something with a situation where you've got an agency and maybe a third party agent or whatever that, you're not necessarily familiar with, you're not necessarily familiar with how it works?
You just have to be fair and be honest. And I think once you've worked in the industry for a bit, you can tell quite easily if someone's trying to spin you a yarn, be that a third party, be it an agent, be it a club. Be it someone who's got their own opinion. If there's truth in what they're saying, you can pick that up pretty quickly, and if there's not, and you can either write a positive or negative story about that should you wish. But I mean, dealing with transfers is always difficult, because you are a tool to get that particular person's thoughts and wants out there, and be that a club, be it a player, be it an agent. I think we've seen it the last couple of weeks, and we see it round about April time, and you see it round about October. That's when you'll see agents making a move to maybe get their players a better move. You won't necessarily hear from players until the window opens or it's just shut. And yeah, it's about being able to see and I think naive will probably be the wrong word, but don't let yourself be taken as naive. And I think I'll go back to what I said earlier, whereas you need to double check anything you're told, double check it, triple check it, try and find out if there's any truth to it. Because whilst there's a rush there to be the first, sometimes the people who get the story out first are the ones that get it, incredibly wrong. And it's those guys who have done a little bit more research and will drop the bombshell the day later. That's in fact the correct story. So I think the thirst to be first can affect quality sometimes. So don't let yourself fall into that trap. But if you're in an outlet where first is everything, then unfortunately you have to put yourself in that position.
Yeah. Joe, I don't know about you, but I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I don't really have too many more questions to add, really. I don't know about you.
Absolutely, yeah. I've learned an awful lot, and I've done a little bit of amateur sports journalism, as indeed you have as well, Josh. I've learned an awful lot over the course of this hour. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us, and I cannot wait for a discussion about the Bundesliga in the next hour.
That's cool. Yeah. Just say to anybody and everyone on your course, unfortunately, people will have to start at the bottom. So don't say, "Oh, I've only done a bit of amateur sports journalism," because that's where everybody starts. If you want to report on the Premier League, you have to cut your teeth in the National League or in non-league journalism. You can't just jump straight into the top. You need that experience to back it up. So yeah, don't just ever say, "Oh, I've just done a little bit of amateur," because everybody's been an amateur journalist at some point. Yeah, don't put yourself down. And if you want to aim for the top, aim for the top, but be aware that you'll have to start at the bottom.
Yeah. It's been a fascinating conversation. We're going to continue with the football in a bit. Chris, do you want to? Are you happy to take a 5-minute break or so?
Yeah, definitely. I've drunk nearly a litre of water. I can take a 5-minute break. Sure.
I'll just remove your stream. We'll catch up with you in just a little bit. Yeah, it's some fascinating stuff, Joe.
It's the kind of interview we've never really done before as well, which is just even better. The insight into transfer stories as well, which is because I've always assumed maybe not on the part of more reliable outlets, but I always get the impression that the thirst to be first is the thing that drives them all, especially when you consider, as Chris alluded to, that whenever you're reporting on a transfer story, it's already basically out of date. These things move so quickly, especially within a condensed window, like especially the January transfer window, only 31 days to do all your business. But yeah, I'd never really considered just how quickly it moves on before, in the sense that if in the time it takes you to type up a 500-word article about what the agent of a player has told you, that news could be completely out of date.
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a fast changing, news cycle that we're in right now. It's incredible. And yeah, that's a fascinating conversation. Obviously, if anyone wants to follow Chris, I think we've put it down in the video description at the bottom. On Twitter, I think it's at Chris78Williams. I hope he doesn't mind me plugging that. Yeah, and if anyone wants us to bring in more interviews, first of all, we are looking. I'll just probably say it now. We've got one coming up on Wednesday, which is someone different from the football industry, but in a different role at least. So we've got that coming up. But if people want other kind of interviews, Joe and I, we're happy to try and make that happen as a RAW Sports team. We're trying to make, people want cricketers on, hockey players, tennis players, or even more journalists and broadcasters, because I feel like everyone's in the same boat. So, and as Chris alluded to, hopefully we can get a few more journalists and broadcasters on just to give their experiences as well. So yeah, guys, let us know if you follow our socials, which are in the video description below. Join the RAW Sport 2019-20 group as well. That's a great way to kind of keep updated. I'm going to put a poll up later on for what kind of guests people would like. And yeah, I think I'm just gonna just check if Chris is good. Chris is good to come back on. Yep. So we're gonna bring it on for the football part, which I don't know. Maybe some people were waiting for. Maybe some people have just joined in. I have no idea. But let's bring you back in. All good, Chris?
Yeah, a lot better now.
Let's start with. We'll get to the Bundesliga in a sec, which is our main kind of focus. But let's get to. There was a bit of news. There was news. I think on Tuesday it came out. It came out that the French Federation and Ligue 1 had agreed to end the season there in conjunction with the government's ruling to stop live sport until I think it's August or September. You put out an interesting tweet about the ramifications it might have for PSG and obviously the Champions League, which is still on pause. That hasn't been finished yet. Do you want to just explain, because you've written extensively about UEFA club competitions, do you want to explain what are the consequences that the decision had on PSG and the Champions League?
Yeah, sure. So let me take it back maybe a couple of weeks, and I've lost all track of time. So this might be 2 weeks ago, it might be 2 months ago. I'm not 100% sure. But just after football was stopped, I think the Premier League stopped, and then the Bundesliga after it, and then everybody else from that. Once those leagues stopped, UEFA very quickly said that at some point the games would have to continue. We're not going to take you going, actually. We're just going to cancel a season. We're going to void it. And then for next season's Champions League, we're just going to put in the same teams that were in this Champions League. UEFA said, well, no, that's not going to happen in our competition. So a few leagues cancelled. Belgium was the first. They still had to declare a champion. Then the Dutch cancelled. They wouldn't declare a champion because AZ and Ajax are locked on points. UEFA still made them choose between who goes into next season's competition, who goes into the qualifier. And then obviously the French have cancelled and they've gone for points per game. Now, France is the first of what we call the traditional Big Five leagues to cancel. So the other four haven't yet. Germany, Spain, Italy and England haven't decided yet. And that had massive ramifications for PSG and for Olympique Lyon, who are both in the latter stages of the Champions League. So PSG are obviously through to the quarter-final. Olympique Lyon are still only halfway through their round of 16 game, but hold a 1-0 advantage over Juventus. So
yeah,
UEFA want those competitions to come back. They've said that leagues must allocate on sporting merit. So like the French have done, they've gone to points. They're just going to take it as it was in the last match day. And who's going to be relegated from that, who's going to go into next season Champions League. But the big problem for those two sides is that now they can't train, and they will be expected to play at the minute. Now, whether the Champions League goes on or not, I've absolutely no idea, and I don't think anybody has at the minute. But as it stands, PSG and Lyon still have games to play, and they can't train. So how are they going to do that? And I think owners of PSG have said that they're going to look at moving the team to somewhere that's not infected. There's a couple of countries in Europe, I think, maybe a couple in the world, where they're going to have to train and play those games. But yeah, it's thrown up a big quandary for the French. Some of their teams now are looking at legal action, Lyon especially, because they said even though they've had a poor season, they could still probably reach the Champions League, or they think they maybe can go on and win it and qualify for next season as well. So the earlier. This is what gets me, how some leagues, not gets me, it makes me wonder why some leagues have gone for this dismissal so early, because, 50 days ago, or maybe I think it might be even 55 days ago now, I was at Anfield for Liverpool against Atletico Madrid, and there was 55,000 people there. 50 days later, I can only go out and get some bread if I really need to. Who knows what the next 50 days are going to look like, which I think it was a strange one for me to see why some leagues had clamoured to finish so early, and others like the Bundesliga and Serie A, Premier League, La Liga are all looking at coming back when it's safe, which I think is what UEFA wanted, and ultimately UEFA will get what it wants because, the biggest money is in the Champions League.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, by the way, guys, I'm going to add Luke Edwards. He's joined us. Hello, Luke.
Hello. How's it going?
Hiya. So we're just talking about the League One decision and the ramifications it has. Obviously, Chris, it meant Stade Rennes got into the Champions League. I think it's the first time in their history. So that is, it's a big achievement for them. But like you said, Jean-Michel Aulas, who's quite vocal, should we say, off the field. he said that they're definitely going to go to take it to court. And I don't know. There's been conflicting reports about Lyon players might having a non-Champions League exit clause. Do you know? I mean, obviously you specialize more in the Bundesliga, but do you know much about that, or do you reckon? And is that a common practice at many clubs as well?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So Lyon do have. I know for a fact they've got 4 players who are on Champions League non-qualification release clauses. Obviously, I'm not going to say who those 4 players are because it wouldn't be the right place for me or right time for me to say that. But I do know for a fact that they do have 4 players, and that's just from covering the Champions League and from speaking to various officials at various clubs, because a few of those Lyon players are highly wanted and highly regarded. So that is what's driving Lyon's main aim, and the fact that they can't train to complete this season's Champions League. I mean, they've been playing very well. Could they win it? Probably not. But I think if you look back to Champions League history, some of the teams that have won it, you would say, well, maybe I didn't think they would win it, 6 months ago or 8 months ago when the season started. So, it's going to be a difficult one for Lyon. But, I mean, that is not uncommon. Players have release clauses for all sorts of reasons. They have higher release clauses for some clubs and lower release clauses for other. So players, if one particular player wants to play at Bayern Munich, his release clause might be 35 million euros for everybody else, 25 million for Bayern Munich. So it all depends on what their contract is and what their contract was negotiated for. But you will find that some of the teams, not that Lyon are a lower downside, but some of these teams that maybe get into Europe occasionally or don't go as prolifically far into will have players who want to leave, and the way they can get them to sign another year is to say, actually, if we don't make the Champions League next year, you can go for a cut price or you can go for free. So yeah, it's not an uncommon release clause at all. It's quite uncommon in England, but on the continent, especially Germany, release clauses are quite a big thing. However, they're now starting to clamp down on them because they're being exploited by the Premier League. So or Premier League clubs have come in for players on release clauses and they've lost a lot of money. So they're trying to take release clauses out. But on the continent, it's pretty much a done thing.
Yeah. Joe, Luke, do you have any questions for Chris about, the League One decision? I'll just fire away.
Other than that, I really want to know who the players at Olympique Lyon are who have the release clause. I could probably guess a couple of them, but again, it's not really the time.
To be honest, you will be able to guess them. It's just that I'm not going to say who it is.
I'll just try and read off my extensive source list at Olympique Lyon to try and find out who the players are. I'm just looking at the table. It is interesting that Lyon really do have a case, not necessarily for the Champions League, but for Europa League places in particular. Yep. The gap in Ligue 1 at the moment between 5th and 9th is only actually 1 point. Even AS Monaco, who had a dreadful start to the season, are in that discussion. So I think unlike the Belgian Pro League decision, which was made relatively amicably, I dare say, for the majority of the league, it seems like there are a lot of teams in France, big clubs as well, not just Lyon but Monaco, not to mention the relegation elect sides, Amiens and Toulouse, who will probably take legal action against this. This is probably the league closure so far that's going to have the most negative implications in the next few months, I dare say.
Yeah, and that's why all the other top 4 leagues have stuck with, we're going to play when it's safe to do so. I think the only problem they've got is this cut-off date that UEFA have given them, because UEFA want to hold the Europa League and Champions League endings. So if there was no European competition, I think we could see this season concluded in August or September. But of course, UEFA don't want that. They want the new season to start, I think, round about September, because they can then get their own competition back underway, or they can finish their own competition. These unrealistic timeframes are coming from UEFA, and that's purely because, just like the other leagues around the world that rely on television money and corporate sponsorship, UEFA rely on them heavily for national games. Don't write off the reasons why they want to get playing international football again, because it brings in a lot of money for them. But the Champions League brings in a hell of a lot of money, and Europa League too brings in a lot of corporate sponsorship. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. But yeah, if you look at the League One table, looking at it now, Toulouse, they don't really have a leg to stand on. They've only won 3 games all season, so I think we could pretty much say they were going down. Not only are they 10 points from safety, they're like 16 points from 17th, or 17 points from 17th. So I think they were out of it. That's probably just a cheeky little legal battle. But Olympique Lyon, yeah, I mean, they're right in that hunt for. I mean, if it went the wrong way, they could get that third slot quite easily. But I mean, they'd have to rely on a lot of games going against them. But this is the time of year where, you know, Leicester City escaped the other year and went on to win the Premier League the season after. So, you know, and teams have blown leads all around. You know, they dropped out of the Champions League. They've missed out on the league. This is a real critical part of the season. So to go to points per game, I can see why some places like Lyon are real against it, because who's to say they're not going to win their final 10 matches? I think we just don't know, do we?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I've got a question. So it's more about talking about a lot of the financial impacts that is going to be had on these sides as a result of the coronavirus crisis. There's a lot of talk of potentially us not having a Champions League or Europa League at all next season. Nobody knows really what's going to be going on with travel restrictions to certain countries. My question is, what sort of if we don't, let's say in the eventuality we don't have any European competition next year, what could the long-term impacts be on not necessarily the bigger Premier League or Bundesliga clubs, or more towards the clubs in the Belgian league, or even the kind of one-off European qualifiers in the case of like Stade Rennais?
I mean, the financial implications to some of the smaller clubs will be massive, because I think when you look at the Champions League group stages, there's always a couple of teams who are like, oh, they're going to get battered. And they do. So if you look at Karabag, for instance, who generally make the group stages, they're very good, but they rely on that money because they get the same payments whether they win, lose or draw as the people who finish top of that group. So that's a lot of money to them. Now, you know, some of the most richest clubs in the world, Barcelona, Real Madrid, Manchester United, they could maybe sup up losing a little bit of television money, but certainly, you know, some of the lower league clubs or some of the lower countries certainly can't afford that. So then that will impact them greatly. I think what will impact some teams would be behind closed doors. It wouldn't matter too much to, let's say, Bournemouth, who make £6 million, I think it is, per season from the gate receipt. But if you look at Manchester United, you'll rake in £111 million a season from gate receipts. That's a pretty big problem for them. Then add in the fact that they might not get 80-90 million from television receipts, and then European television receipts. All of a sudden becomes a real big problem for clubs. So I think it'll affect clubs in the same way, but different percentage. So, you know, whilst Manchester United might lose, let's say they lose 200 million, that could be 20% of their income. But if you lose 5 million, but you only get 20 million a year, that's still 20% of your income. So it's going to affect different clubs in different ways. But I think what it shows is how football is linked. You know, there's billions of pounds in the game, but it's not billions of pounds of cash. It's billions of pounds of electronic money that is on a knife edge. And I think we're seeing how sharp that knife edge is at the minute.
Yeah. And moving, kind of transitioning now to the league that you do cover a lot, the Bundesliga. They're the first major European league to kind of say that they plan to come back. They were hoping next weekend, but obviously there was news yesterday about the Cologne and the 3 positive coronavirus cases. Do you think that will impact the decision making at all? Because I know they're all waiting on a meeting on Wednesday, right, to find out if they are going to get the go ahead or not. Do you think the recent kind of cases will it affect the decision making at all?
Well, I'm going to say no, and I base that on the fact that a colleague of mine last night spoke to a sporting director of a Bundesliga club, and they said it's not going to impact it. I think what we need to do, and what's been lost in the UK, is I think we're looking at the Bundesliga returning through the eyes of what's gone on in the UK. So whilst if you look at Germany, it's got the same number or very similar number of coronavirus infections, it's had 7,000 people die, which is 7,000 people too much. But if you look at an average of how many people die a day on the roads, or how many people die a day or a year through terminal illnesses, Germany's had 7,000 people. You know, the United Kingdom's had 27,000 people. That puts a completely different, you know, angle on whether football should return in the UK. Is it too soon, etc. Germany, you know, you could, if we were in Germany now, I could say I'm just nipping out. I'm going to go and buy a pair of trainers because the shops are open. I can get on a bus, I can get on the train. They've sort of got a new normality coming back, which is going to allow the Bundesliga to come back. They've got spare capacity in testing. You know, they're not in the same sort of problem that the UK is as. So they've got the test that the Bundesliga needs isn't going to impact their frontline carers. It's not going to impact frontline carers in the UK because the Premier League are going to financially source them. I think people misunderstand that as well. They're not going to take tests away from the front line because that's the government's responsibility to buy them. Now, why they haven't bought them, that's a comment for someone else who's far more intelligent than me on the matter. But the matter is, those tests are available. The Premier League are going to buy them. So in Germany, it's a completely different situation. And the biggest problem that German football has found is that fans don't want it to be played behind closed doors. That's the biggest problem, which is a lot different from here, where, you know, in the UK now, we're not even out of lockdown. You can't even go to shop properly. You know, we're still 2 meters away from everybody. We don't even know if we're going to wear masks when we go shopping. It's a completely different prospect. So I think you have to take Germany as an individual country, which of course what it is, with its own individual set of problems. And it's a lot further down the road than we are. So I don't think it will impact it. In fact, I think it shows that what they're trying to do is working, because they're testing players twice a week. Anybody that's found to be infected is immediately quarantined. Had those 3 people not been tested, and I know for a fact that they're all asymptomatic, so they've shown no symptoms, they would have gone home, they would have gone to the shop, you know, they would have potentially coughed in their hand and then touched the supermarket trolley, and then who comes along after that? So it will stop, you know, spreading of the infection. But it doesn't look good to us because we're in a different place than them at the moment. But I think it just highlights, you know, how serious a situation it is. Now, whether it does come back, that'll all depend on the government. And, you know, 3 people testing positive at FC Köln won't be a problem for them. It's going to be like how many people potentially could be infected at the games. That's where the problem comes from. When you've got 200 people trying to run, you know, each individual game. I think 3 people getting tested in a small squad of 20, and they can contact trace who has and who hasn't got it. It won't be a problem for them, and certainly doesn't look to be a problem for them at the minute. I think the 9th of May was an idea that was floated and could always be pushed back, because personally I thought 16th of May would be too early, maybe the week after, which I think would be the 24th. Looking at now, I realistically think it would be a 30th of May return.
Okay. And maybe, you know, because this has been obviously an ongoing process, and obviously, you know, you've got the league, you've got the clubs, you've got the German government, they've all probably been liaising. You've obviously written about, you know, we talked about the story about the chip in the Bundesliga ball, so you know how the Bundesliga make their decisions kind of as a governing body. Do you can you just share to our audience, like, how, you know, what would have been in their thinking process? Like, how would they have kind of decided, you know, we think we can come back in May, maybe, and we think we can, if we get this right and we sort this out. And obviously, you know, the fans, we've seen a lot of reports about how the fans, like in terms of the ownership model and stuff, they obviously matter a lot in Germany. So how would it, is it going to, you know, the fan opposition to playing behind closed doors, is that going to have any impact at all on their current thinking?
Well, the first part of your question, how did the DFL come about with the situation? Obviously, they've got scientific experts in, virologist experts have come in, and they've worked with federal and state government. Probably might be worth explaining that Germany's a little bit different. So in the UK, you know, number 10 decides everything, and then the councils impact that throughout. Germany's a little bit different. The state government had, and when I mean by state, I mean the states. So the state of Bavaria, the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, they own the power, not the central government. So if they decide, if 15 states decide we can play football, and Bavaria say actually football's not going to come back, that would be a problem. The German government then can't say to Bavaria, you must allow football to go on. They don't have that power. So it's bequeathed in each individual state. And they obviously have sat down with their experts and have come up with a project a little bit similar, although I've not seen Project Restart for Premier League. I've not had my eyes on a paperwork. I would pretty much assume, you know, it's 99, if not 100% matched to what's going to go on in the Bundesliga. And you can see already by how many times they're going to test players, how they're going to move them around, etc. And then when it comes to fans, German ultras are a real force for good. But they can also be a little unrealistic at times. Now, they were a real force for good in getting the game stopped. The German Bundesliga was going to play play on behind closed doors. It had one match, and then it was cancelled after. But the ultras were against that immediately. They said, health has to come first before finance. They're really good at promoting equality and acceptance of refugees. Refugees welcome. They're always pushing for inclusion for all different types of genres in society. They're a real force for good. But sometimes they can be a bit unrealistic, and they're upset that German football is so reliant on television money, and they think it's only coming back for the money. And let's be honest, it is, because German football is going to lose 750 million euros, and there's 60,000 jobs at risk if the Bundesliga doesn't come back, and that's the main driver for it. And German clubs are unhappy about that. German ultras are unhappy about that. But if it doesn't come back, there'll be no clubs for them to come back to. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. And I got a lot of time for ultras, but I also sometimes think that if everything was perfect, they'd find something wrong to complain about. But on 99% on the whole, they do a fantastic job, and they keep German football what it is and why it's so special, because it's 50+1 fan ownership. They make sure that clubs are socially and morally responsible, and they don't want their football turned into a cash cow, which is what they've seen a Premier League turned into. And they do a very, very good job over there, and they do hold a lot of sway.
Yeah. Joe, Luke, do you want to ask anything before we kind of start then to preview what we think will be the remaining kind of Bundesliga games? Do you guys have any other questions about German football and the governance?
I mean, it's more the government of Germany as a whole, or at least the situation in Germany as a whole. I know that you've been based in Lincolnshire for as long as lockdown's been going on, but the stories coming out of Germany over the last few days, I saw it before the story of the 3 infected personnel at FC Köln, was the fact that the infection rate after Germany eased the lockdown procedures had reached or surpassed 1.0, which is obviously the rate at which the disease will exponentially grow as opposed to be contained. Do you potentially see, if that is the case, that the German government or the federal system that they have, will they potentially change their mind, and actually the Bundesliga could be suspended or cancelled? Maybe not cancelled outright like Ligue 1 was, but is there really a chance that if a second lockdown is necessary, that the Bundesliga just might not come back in the next month or so?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's something that we're just going to have to keep an eye on for the next few days. So it had been reported that it hit 1. The actual figure was 0.97. Now, it's been rounded up to 1, but if you extrapolate that across the whole population, that 0.3 rounded up, it does equate to a lot of people. So it's now also dropped back down. They found, I think it's 0.76. And that's just going by German media. I don't think it will affect it. Football's non-essential. I think we can all agree on that. But they do have other non-essential businesses open. So as I said earlier, if you can go and buy a pair of trainers, or, if I can nip into Saturn, which is the German equivalent of PC World, and buy an e-scooter, then I can't see why football can't come back, because the person on the till that's going to sell me a non-essential electric scooter is just in as much danger as someone in a football ground. So it's how the country looks at it as a whole. But I don't think it will affect it at the minute. If we start seeing in the next couple of days that 4 people at Borussia Dortmund, 5 people at Bayern Munich, 10 people at Mainz, or a few people at Leipzig are starting to get infected, and that could be a problem. And then it also depends who gets infected. So whilst Cologne haven't released any names, they have said it's 2 players and a physiotherapist. But imagine if that's Bayern Munich and those 2 players are Robert Lewandowski and Manuel Neuer, they will probably argue that that's going to affect their ability to play football, because they're going to have to put, they're going to have to come up with people who maybe they didn't want to put in their first 11 in their first 11. I think that's where the key to will football return or not is going to be. I think we're in a position in the world where at the moment we're going to have to learn to live side by side with this, and it's not putting people in danger that need to be put in unnecessarily. But if government decide that non-essential people go back to work, then non-essential people go back to work. The thing that will stop football is if 5 players test positive, and those 5 players are 5 out your starting 11. That's where the trouble will be. And I don't say if it's 5 backroom member staff, that doesn't matter, because it does matter, but that doesn't affect the football club's ability to play a game, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, we saw something similar when it was Arteta was the first positive case here, wasn't it? In terms of the football industry.
Hudson-Odoi was the first one, and then Arteta a couple of days after.
Yeah. So I imagine Arsenal would have lodged a similar argument that they would have needed him on the touchline. I don't know.
That was an interesting one because it came a few hours after the Premier League announced they were going to be continuing with the weekend fixtures.
Yeah.
So they copped a lot of slack for it.
So
that's why they have to be really careful with when they do decide to come back, if they choose to come back, of course.
And I think when we look back now, and that's a good point, that Luke. If we look back now, I mean, the Premier League were only going by what the government was saying. So the Premier League was going to carry on because that Wednesday I'd been at Anfield and there was 250,000 people going to Cheltenham races. So, the government's view on what we were going to do was a little bit different than what it is now, which is why you're quite right. The Premier League need to plan to come back when it's safe. They've always said that. And I think a lot of people, and I get why they're saying it, they're going, how can even football think about coming back? There's 1,000 people, 700 people dying a day. It's not going to come back this weekend because that would be very wrong. But, business, McDonald's are starting to look at reopening. Ask them the same thing. Why are you looking at reopening if there's 700 people dying a night? They're looking at reopening in 4 to 5 weeks. Now, you would hope when the Premier League wants to come back, which is June 8th, might even be a little bit later, 16th, you would hope that we're in a lot better situation now where it's unfortunately people will still be dying, but it's going to be, dare I say, a level that we can live with a little better, because we have to remember, people die on the roads every day. They die of influenza, they die of pneumonia. Dying is unfortunately the only thing we know is going to happen after we're born. So it's about making sure that people don't die unnecessarily. And I think if football came back now, that would look a little bit insensitive. But it has to plan to come back at some point, and I think maybe people get lost in that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess now transitioning over to kind of it's a preview of sorts. We obviously there are 9 game weeks to go. I think, am I right? 2 teams have 10 games to go. They have a game in hand, and we'll put down the ticker of the 5 teams that mathematically, and I'm not saying Leverkusen are going to win the title by all means, but mathematically they have a chance at least. Chris, are you surprised that with 9 games to go, there's still 5 teams kind of in that cluster, in that pack that, albeit we know certain teams are more likely to get to the top than others, but are you surprised that there are 5 teams in contention at all?
Yeah, most definitely. Because I've covered the Bundesliga professionally now for 4 seasons, but I've been watching it for 25 years. And it's the closest I can remember for a long time. Normally, as we've seen the past 7 years, 6-7 years, Bayern Munich have run away with it. Or it's not been who's going to win it. We've known it's who's going to be relegated, who's going to qualify for Champions League. That's been the exciting thing. But before we broke for the pandemic outbreak, it's one of the closest competitions I've seen in the Bundesliga for years, and it's been a real joy to cover it because you look now, Bayern are top with 55. Okay, they came better once Hansi Flick got his feet under the table and got his tactics on board. But Borussia Dortmund came better. Leipzig have been there or thereabouts. Very new club, brand new manager in this season, Julian Nagelsmann. Although he's exceptionally experienced for his age, it's still a new challenge for him. And I think them being where they are still now is a good sign for them. Borussia Mönchengladbach were long-time leaders for a while. If you go back to Christmas, everybody was thinking, can they go on and win the title? And that's something that's not been talked about for 20 years. Leverkusen, another side, brilliant side to watch, probably one of the most exciting teams to watch in the Bundesliga. Must be a nightmare for their fans because you don't know if they're going to win 4-0 or get beat 4-0. That's the beauty of Bayer Leverkusen. I was lucky enough to be there a couple of times this season already, interviewed their sporting director and the goalkeeper as well. And they're having a wonderful season. They've got a real good recruitment and they've got a very good family feel to their club. And I don't think they would have thought that they could be within touching distance of the top or certainly qualifying for the Champions League again, which is, they're in a good position to do that when it comes back, fighting Gladbach for that last one. And then Schalke, who had a horrendous season last season and under Domenico Tedesco the season before that, Obviously got David Wagner, who's turning their side around, and third biggest club in Germany by membership, quite rightly back in the top 6. And then Wolfsburg, who another team who've come good. I went to see them twice in succession in relegation playoffs, and all of a sudden, they're looking like they could qualify for Europe again. So yeah, it's been a real thrilling season. Standout for me has been Union Berlin, who've come up from the Bundesliga. I was fortunate enough to go to their first Bundesliga game against Leipzig, where they were hammered 4-0, but that didn't detract from the atmosphere there. And then I was there for their next home game where they beat Dortmund as well. And that was a wonderful occasion. So they're a real good club, and I'm glad they've survived the drop, because they can't see them going down now. And scroll further down the table, in Dusseldorf, they maybe operated a little bit higher last season than their true ceiling. And unfortunately for Paderborn, they are at their glass ceiling. The 18th place in the Bundesliga is the best they'll ever get. They're probably a top 30 side in Germany, which would put them, mid-table in the next league as well.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of and going back to kind of the top, a lot of these managers are relatively inexperienced in the Bundesliga, should we say? I mean, Nagelsmann obviously has been at Hoffenheim for a while, but this is his first season at Leipzig. Marco Rose, like you said, his first season at Gladbach, obviously he had tremendous success at Salzburg. And then Hansi Flick, who just got his new permanent deal rather, he's been elevated to a position he's not been in before. Is there like a manager that stood out, or are you surprised by the success of the likes of Nagelsmann, Rose, in terms of implementing their tactics and styles so quickly and getting so much success from it?
I'm not surprised Marco Rose has done so well at Gladbach, because he's a fantastic coach. Had Dortmund not got Lucien Favre when they wanted him, Marco Rose was top of their wish list for that, and you can see why, because that Salzburg team he had, Jesse Marsch has obviously come in and taken them to the next level, but Marco Rose has started all of that. And just looking at them now, those 15 games that they've won, they've not won though by accident or by fluke. They play some fantastic football, a little bit different than what you'd see in Germany normally. I think Marco Rose has brought a bit of a fresh outlook to it. But yeah, you're on about Julian Nagelsmann. I think him and Leipzig are a hand and glove fit, and will be for a number of years to come. And Hansi Flick, of course, came in and completely turned Bayern Munich around. When nothing against Niko Kovac, I think he's a wonderful coach, but his philosophy and his playing style never suited Bayern Munich, and he was the only person available to take that job, which is why he took it. He still won the double with them, but he was never going to stay long term, because his ability to play the Bayern Munich way was never there. Hansi Flick is exactly the type of coach that Bayern Munich would go after and need, and he's come in and turned that club around now. So unfortunately, football stopped, but it stopped at the worst possible time for the Bundesliga, because it's been as close as it's ever been in years.
Yeah, I mean, Luke, Joe, you guys obviously follow a lot of European football. What stood out to you guys from this season? What's been like something that surprised you, or just been something that's been you can't take your eyes off?
Well, back when we were covering it week in, week out, it wasn't a case of 5 teams at the top of the table that were interesting us. It was actually a case of 10, even 12 teams that were split by absolutely minimal amounts in the first, let's say, 15 match days. I mean, we were covering the Bundesliga every week until basically the end of December, and the title and every European place was still wide open at that point. The cliche in this country is to talk about relegation 6-pointers. Basically, half the games every week were top 10 6-pointers. I think that Luke termed it. It's been a fascinating season to watch for so many reasons. A couple of teams that have let me down. I predicted they'd finish, I think, 7th at the beginning of the year. I think Werder Bremen have absolutely shocked me this year, especially from a defensive angle, and also from the off the field side of things. The recruitment side's been particularly interesting. Hertha Berlin, all the investment that's come into the club since last season, and how they just haven't improved. Now, obviously, throwing money at the problem doesn't necessarily make it better. But even if you look at the big investments they made in January, Lucas Toussaint from Lyon, which I'm a big fan of as a signing, he doesn't come in till the end of the year. And, Krzysztof Piątek from Milan. I mean, the cliche in football these days is that you can rise to the top very quickly. Krzysztof Piątek is the living proof that you can fall even quicker. And I think this is now his 4th club in just 2 seasons. And since the start of January, he really did not hit the ground running at Hertha. So they're in an interesting position, even to the extent that they hired Jurgen Klinsmann, who I believe hadn't had a job for 2 years prior. It's a very interesting like league of personalities in the Bundesliga, which I don't think we've seen for a while either. No,
so I mean, Bayern Munich have got the nickname in Germany of FC Hollywood because there's always something mad going on, like a film. And I think Hertha Berlin have taken that over. Not only in the last window, they were the biggest spenders in Europe, which I think is a pretty big statement for them to put out there. They're 13th. Their major investor, Lars Windhorst, covered him for Forbes. He's a real character himself. Known for a couple of shady dealings in the past that he's been at his wrist slap for. He's come in and he wants to take Hertha to the next level. He wants to make them into a top 4 side. And he put his money where his mouth is. Not only did he spend a lot of money, he's also earmarked building for a new stadium for Hertha, because although they're a very well supported side, I'm sure you guys know they play in the Olympiastadion, which is the national stadium. They need a stadium that holds about 40,000. If you could get Hertha Berlin to maybe even 40 to 45,000 stadium, that would be one of the most intimidating places to play in. Unfortunately, the noise gets lost in the size of the Olympiastadion and the fact that normally the top tier is pretty empty, but that still gives them an average gate of 50,000. It just gets lost in such a big stadium, a little bit like Tottenham found at Wembley. But that Hertha Berlin does show that you can't just throw money at the situation. Jurgen Klinsmann came in, big name, for this big money, it was a roller coaster ride of 50 days max. I was there. I was flying back from Hamburg the day he did his Facebook Live, where he said he was leaving. It was a real film. I'm sure someone will make a film about it in Germany, but it's a crazy situation. And Hertha Berlin will be worried because if they drop down, that massive investment by Windhorst, he's bought now 49% of the club. He's invested a lot of money, somewhere in a region about 300 million euros. If they were to drop down to the second division, that all of a sudden makes that club's investment, twofold in the negative. It's going to be real interesting for them. And I think they're probably the club that have let down the most looking in. And their fans will be threaders with them completely. But massive surprise for them. Real big surprise. But definitely one to keep an eye on should the Bundesliga come back. Because if they can't adapt to playing in front of no fans, in closed stadiums, if it all goes wrong for them, I think they could be one of the clubs that goes to the wall. Should they get relegated and then this new football is behind closed doors until maybe next March or something, they'll get less money from being in the Bundesliga too. They'll still be hemorrhaging outgoings with players on high wages. So they'll be a real interesting club to look at.
You mentioned the Zwei Bundesliga a couple of times. I've looked at the table now, and I'm surprised by the size of the couple of teams that are in that division, likes of Stuttgart, who won the league just over 10 years ago. You've got likes of Hamburg, who have been a mainstay of the Bundesliga for many years. I think they only got relegated very recently. How much have you watched those teams this season? Because I've seen Stuttgart's play their squad, and they've got likes of Mario Gomez and some real big names in that side. So my question is, do you think in a relegation playoff, because I believe that happens with the 16th place team.
Yeah.
Do you think that any of these Zwei Bundesliga sides could beat a relegation candidate from the Bundesliga? And do you think that next season, should they end up getting promoted, how do you think they'll fare in the Bundesliga, competing with other top sides?
Arminia Bielefeld, how will they cope? Yeah. So first, the relegation playoff is probably one of the best two-legged games I've ever covered as a sports writer. It's just unbelievable because of what's at stake, and there's a lot of things at stake. And it's also fascinating because if you're in the Zwei Bundesliga and you just make that third place at the end of the season, you're elated and you're on a massive high. If you just make that 16th place on the very last day, all of a sudden you're in a massive low. And then you've got the mental side of the game, which I think, is a massive part of football. But as it stands, Stuttgart went down. They were beaten in the playoff last season by Union Berlin, which is the first time it happened in a long time. I think Hamburg would be favourites to go up against whoever they faced in that 16th slot from any of the four teams that are available to go in it. Armani Bielefeld, brilliant, real nice club, real good local feel to it. Unfortunately, I think they would be in a Paderborn situation, which is not to say that's bad for them, because the beauty of German football is they've got 2 top divisions with 18 teams each. So I think out of those 36 teams, there are 30 of them which are really good clubs, which makes the battle each year for who's going to be in the top 18 a real interesting one. And it's also something that keeps the league so tight. I think you're on about going back to Christmas when there was one of maybe 8 teams that could win the title. If you look at that table from back then, there was one of 8 teams that could win the title, but when you get to 9th, you could also be relegated. I mean, that's just the perfect league, I think, for anybody to cover. So, it's if you look at that table now, Fortuna Dusseldorf are favourites to go in that relegation slot. But if you look above them, Mainz and Augsburg, and even if you go to Hertha Berlin, I think Hamburg would wipe the floor with any of them sides, to be honest, and including Werder Bremen as well, should they make that 16th spot.
Sure.
Yeah. Joe mentioned Werder Bremen, and one player who's really stood out for them is Milo Rashica.
Yeah,
I think I've pronounced his name right.
You have indeed.
Yeah, he's obviously impressed, and with Bremen in the position they are in, it's fair to say he's one of the likely candidates to leave. Would you see him, because obviously I think Liverpool have been linked with him at one stage. I think Dortmund maybe as well, should Jadon Sancho, and we can get onto Jadon Sancho in a bit, should he go. Would Rashica, how impressed have you been by him, first of all? And do you see him going to another higher tier Bundesliga club, or maybe even going abroad?
I think it's a great question. So Rashica's a fabulous player. He's one of those wide players that can play out wide. He can play in the central area as a striker. He can also be involved in the build-up play. He's quite happy to drive one-on-one at players, but he's also quite happy to be involved in the build-up. That person to play that hockey pass, the pass before the assist. He can do all that. I think if he came to the Premier League, he would be good. If he went to a top 4 side in the Premier League, I think he'd need 3 to 4 months of acclimatization to get used to the league, which might be even stranger now because of I think the tempo of the Premier League football will drop slightly without fans in it. So maybe Rashica would be able to adapt to the game quicker. But I think if he went, just looking at the clubs around there, I mean, Werder Bremen are a great club. Should he go to Borussia Dortmund, I think he'd be a lot more successful at Dortmund immediately than he would do if he went to a Premier League club. That's not to say he's no good. Yeah. I think he could hit the ground running in Germany quicker because he can speak the language, he knows the culture, he knows the club, he knows the leagues, he knows his opponents. That's the sort of thing you don't get when you move leagues. If he was to move to somewhere, and he said he was in Liverpool, had been linked to him. If he was to move to Liverpool, I think he'd be an amazing backup for their front three. Probably for one of the wider players. So either Mane or Salah. I don't think he'd be a like for like swap with Firmino, but he can play in that central area and drop back. So I think he would be good. He's very versatile. So he suits a 4-4-2, 4-3-3, 4-2-3-1. He can play in any of those formations. But I think he would be a good backup for a top 4 Premier League side. I think if you're looking for mid-table and below, he could probably walk into the majority of those Premier League sides, but he'd need a little bit of time to adapt. What's going to be interesting is players like him, do they move to England? Because do you want to move house at the minute to a country in this particular day and age? Not only has he got COVID-19 to deal with, he's got potential ramifications for Brexit, for foreign players in the country. What's his requirements to stay in the country? I think that's going to be really interesting. But me personally, I think he will be suited to maybe look at the table now, a top 7 side in the Bundesliga. He could walk into quite happily, but Premier League would take a little bit of adaptation. But I think he could do it.
I'm only suppressing a smile because he sounds very much like a West Ham signing.
I think he's a bit better than that.
Understatement of the century.
Yeah, I don't know if he would fit. I don't know if he'd fit David Moyes' style of play. I think any player, when they're going to move, they've got to move to the right.
Like Marouane Fellaini.
Yeah.
Oh, David. Oh, goodness. The amount of West Ham jokes we could make. But like as you said, it's very hard to gauge, and I guess we addressed it earlier, but it's very unlikely we're going to have any big money transfer moves this summer. But a lot of players have stood out and have been linked to with moves. A lot of stars of the Bundesliga have been linked with moves elsewhere throughout the season. That you talk about the likes of. We're going to pause it. Luke, I know you got to head off. Thanks for joining us, mate.
But yeah, nice to meet you, Chris, and take care, guys. Good luck with the rest of the stream.
Cheers.
All right. Cheers for Luke. As I was saying, there's a lot of players that have been linked with moves elsewhere. You're talking about the likes of Dayo Upamecano. You're talking about from obviously Sancho, Werner, Kai Havertz as well. Do you reckon these transfers are basically essentially put on pause for the next window, and we could see that next window, the next summer window, 2021, there's going to be a lot of cash kind of been thrown around, and maybe some of the Bundesliga players kind of treat this next, or however much we get of the next season, as a bit of a swan song before deciding to make a move elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, you don't know, who'd want to move abroad at the minute. I quite happily take a job in Germany. If anybody's watching, I'll take a job in Germany, so I quite happily move. But if I was a football player, there's a lot to consider. There's also a lot to consider for clubs, because I don't know if you guys know a website called Transfermarkt. It's German owned. Now they do a lot of good work with agents, so their player valuations are pretty much spot on. Now, they're market valuations, they're not valuations to the club. So whilst a player's market value may be 80 million euros, the value to the club might be 120 million euros, because you've got to go out and buy a new player, you've got to coach him. Can he do what he's doing in a minute? No. I think that's where market value and club value are a little bit different. But they've wiped £9 billion off players' value throughout the top 5 leagues, and I think in the MLS as well. And that shows, I think, the appetite to spend in football's gone down, but clubs will still want that money. So I did an article on Jadon Sancho about 2 weeks ago, spoke to people at Dortmund. They don't care whether his market value is now 95 million euros. They don't care whether it's 70 million euros. They want 120 for him, because they know in order to replace Jadon Sancho, whoever they go after will be like, well, actually, you just got 120 million for him, so we want a little bit extra off you. So I don't think anybody's going to get Jadon Sancho cut price, which then, does he want to move? Is it the right time to move? And you look at Manchester United or Chelsea, do they really want to spend that money? Because they don't know how much they're going to get from gate receipts. They don't know how much they're going to get from television money. If the Premier League ends and no games go on, Sky and BT and NBC could quite happily say, you've not fulfilled your contract, we're not going to pay you any money. So all of a sudden the clubs have got maybe £100 million less each to spend, and that will impact them. Story last night broke that Liverpool aren't going to spend for the entire summer. I think that might be more of a Liverpool wanted approach. So maybe they can get players a little bit cheaper. They can say, we can't spend as much because we're skint, so we're going to give you 30 million for a player that's worth 40 million. And that waits to be seen. But transfers are going to be really interesting to see. I personally think if football doesn't come back soon, if it's safe to, and it looks like there's going to be no fans in stadiums next season until maybe the end of next season, I think we'll see very, very limited action in the transfer market, or we'll see someone like Jadon Sancho agree to join Manchester United the end of next season. So they will play out their last season at whatever club they're in. I could see that situation happening because clubs just won't have the money to spend right now.
Yeah, I only ask because obviously, we've seen a lot of, and I'm sure Liverpool fans will know because they've probably kept an eye out of it, but Timo Werner's made heavy links himself coming out of his mouth saying he'd like to join Liverpool and my club.
Yeah.
Go on.
I sometimes don't know how much clubs like that. I don't think Jurgen Klopp's particularly keen on it. I don't think that Liverpool as a club are particularly keen on it. It's almost forcing them to say, buy me. I don't think that tends to work at some clubs. It does at others. I don't think it tends to work at Liverpool at this minute. That's not to say that I think it'd be a great fit. But yeah, there are players who are vocal, and then you've got players who are not vocal. Jadon Sancho's said nothing, apart from he had a sip of water when someone asked him, take a sip of water if you're going to join Man United, and he had a drink. I think that's the closest anybody's come to saying he might join. But yeah, it depends on the players, really.
Yeah, no, my only question there was if Werner's made it so clear that he's considering a move away, are we going to see a scenario where he kind of plays out the next season or whatever, and is kind of effectively just he's just waiting for the move. He kind of just becomes a player playing at Leipzig, whilst knowing he's not keen to hang around.
Yeah, I think so. He did an interview with Bild last night in Germany to say, he necessarily doesn't want to leave at the minute. He's not said he wants to walk away. Now, I think that's probably got more to do with the fact that clubs aren't buying at the moment. He's been very vocal he wants to leave. I think the Leipzig fans have been okay with that, because whilst he's been saying he's very vocal to leave, he's also been spearheading their title charge. And, I think he's one of the standout players. When I was in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, in the press box that night watching it, only did he score a penalty, he was also an absolute nightmare for the Spurs back four. So he's shown he can play in the Premier League and he can hold his weight in it. And I think had the situation been a little better across the world, maybe that deal might have been already sorted out by now, because if you go by a lot more people who are connected at Liverpool than I am, I've certainly floated the idea that Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool are interested in him. And I do personally think he would be a very good fit. But whether that deal gets over the line or not now, I think will depend on what future looks like. But he's certainly a player who could move straight from the Bundesliga and jump into the Premier League, no problems. But then again, I did say that about Naby Keita, who sort of struggled a little bit to adapt to Liverpool.
Yeah, Joe, do you want to add any players that have stood out for you? Do you want to ask Chris about, or any?
Well, I was on the Timo Werner situation. It's what strikes me as why it's potentially more likely to happen is, well, it's a number of factors. Number one, obviously, Liverpool specifically is moving to a German manager, speaks the language. He hasn't had experience, as far as I'm aware, with Jurgen Klopp, but systematically, I think you've already alluded to, the players fit together quite well, especially since Werner can play out on the wing an awful lot. He's not, because of course at Leipzig they basically have a rotating pool of strikers that are all very good in front of goal. For Leipzig, kind of irrespective of how much they get, they will have enough money to bring in a replacement. This season they've had Patrick Schick on loan from AS Roma, of course. Took him a while to get his first game, but actually I've been very impressed with him of late. Has scored an awful lot more goals than we were expecting. But I don't know how much. I can't remember what the fee was, because I do believe there's an option to buy in there, but it would still be a saving if they brought him in as opposed to Werner leaving. So there is a cause and effect of why it would be beneficial for Leipzig financially, for Liverpool in terms of the squad, with the possible exception of Liverpool moving out someone like Xherdan Shaqiri, who may lose his bench position if Werner was to come in. So I can see why that's happening. The player that I've been staggered by for several years in the Bundesliga, who still has not made that big move in the league, because I always thought he'd move in the league as opposed to foreign, is Kai Havertz. Obviously, he's had another great season at Bayer Leverkusen. Do you think there's any potential that he could move in the next, let's say, 14 months or so, including as late as next summer? Do you foresee a move on the horizon for him? And if there is one, would it be to a Premier League side, a Liga side, or just one of the truly big sides in the Bundesliga?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I see him moving inside the next 14 months? Yes, because obviously that it's a lot later than where we are now. Maybe not moving this summer. I think he would be a great fit for Dortmund. He would also be a great fit for Bayern. I think we can probably say at his young, tender age, he's one of the future German national stars, consistent stars. So he will be one of the first names on the German national side, first 11 team sheet for the next 10 years. I would think maybe not that long, maybe next 6 to 8 years. And so there will be top clubs fighting for him. I think he would fit. It would fit a number of teams. I think he'd fit Manchester City style under Guardiola. I think he'd fit Klopp. I can't see him going there, but I think he could quite happily fit into what Brendan Rodgers is building at Leicester. So he's got the ability to fit into a number of Premier League clubs, but he's also got the ability to fit into a number of top Bundesliga clubs. He could probably make that move to one of the top Spanish sides. Would he be a starter? Would it be a move too soon? I think a lot of players have seen what has happened to Felipe Coutinho and Dembele, especially German players have seen what's happened to Dembele. Absolutely set the Bundesliga on fire. Went to Barcelona for a lot of money and then sank like a heavy rock. And that's not to say he's not a good player, because he's a phenomenal player. He just hasn't fitted into the top two, one of the top two sides in Spain, and he's not been able to adapt. I think a lot of German players have seen that as maybe a little bit of a warning for him. I know he's not German, but obviously he's played the highest German level. I think Kai Havertz would be an excellent fit at either Liverpool, Manchester City, Dortmund, or Bayern. Outside of that, you'd be looking at one of the top teams in Spain or Italy. I don't think the Italian style of playing is up to him as yet. I think he would have to learn a lot to play in Italy. Not that he couldn't, because I think he's technically gifted enough. I don't think he's tactically aware enough to play in Italy yet. I think it's a very, very tactical league. He's a young lad.
When I look at the more offensively progressive sides in Italian football, and let's ignore some of the teams lower down the table who would never be able to afford Kai Havertz, teams like Sassuolo, you could even throw Atalanta into that mix.
Yeah, he would be a perfect fit at Atalanta, but they'd never be able to afford him. Yeah.
But there's no other sides towards the top of Serie A that I can think of that even use a player in kind of the goal-scoring attacking midfield role that Kai Havertz plays. Maybe Napoli if they rebuilt, but that's about it. I think the clubs that you've outlined, I was surprised that you mentioned Man City. I hadn't really considered that before, but yeah, that's just another player that can keep Phil Foden out of the team sheet for another 5 years.
Yeah, it will be. Yeah. But once again, Bayer Leverkusen will want a lot of money for him, because how do they replace him? I mean, he's been exceptional over the last few seasons when he burst onto the scene. He's only a young player, so he's had ups and downs. He was a little bit ropey early on the start of this season, but he's going to be, because he's nowhere near his peak. I think people forget that football midfielders hit their peak around about 26, 27. Defenders, you're looking at 29. Look at Van Dijk, what best defender in the world. He's not 22 years old. And then you look at keepers, Manuel Neuer, I would argue, is up there with Alisson. But Manuel Neuer is a lot older than Alisson. So the older you are in football, because of how fit the players are these days, their bodies are able to keep up to date, but their minds are able to mature and they're able to play a lot longer. So it would be interesting to see where he goes, because Kai Havertz's next move would have to be, I think, for 4 to 5 to 6 seasons. I think if he went somewhere and flopped, and it's not a nice word, but Dembele has flopped at Barcelona, it could kill his career, and that would be the worst thing for him.
Yeah, I mean, Joe and I brought up a few players. Are there any players that you've been surprised that you want to give a shout out to, or just kind of a name that maybe people here should kind of follow in the upcoming maybe 12 months, 14 months or so?
I mean, just look at the players that Gladbach have had. So Alexander Play has been a phenomenal player. Thuram there as well. They've got some real good players. Now, could they make? I don't know if they'd make the jump in the Premier League just yet. But if I was them, I wouldn't really want to, because they're playing some fantastic football at Gladbach under Marco Rose. And why would you want to leave if you can? It's always a question for a player. Do I want to leave where I'm one of the first team players on the team sheet? Do I want to go and leave and sit on the bench somewhere like even Leicester or Everton? Would he even want to go and sit on the bench there? He could play there, but he wouldn't get a starting place like he would do at Gladbach. So I mean, they're two real exciting players that maybe people should keep an eye on. Diaby over at Bayer Leverkusen is like a really exciting player as well. And they've got some real good recruitment. So yeah, keep an eye on Bayer Leverkusen. Bayer Leverkusen are a wonderful team to watch, especially if you've got no actual passion or heart buy-in, because as I say, they can get beat 4-0 or win 4-0. It's complete lottery with them.
Yeah, I'm going to throw Dennis Zakaria has been terrific at Gladbach as well. He's been terrific. And Leverkusen, I mean, it was a surprise when they let Julian Brandt go to Dortmund. I mean, they're not geographically rivals, but obviously it's someone that they would be competing for at the higher tier, the Bundesliga. And obviously Peter Bosch is there as well, he didn't have a great time at Dortmund, to put it kindly to him.
Yeah.
Are you surprised that he's managed to kind of harness this Leverkusen team and kind of just get them to play it as well as they can be, given that he didn't have a great time at Dortmund, and given that at Ajax, obviously Dutch football observers would have seen him for a while, but we really just saw him for one season at Ajax before he made that move.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we take Dortmund out, because unfortunately, like players, coaches can sometimes be a square peg in a round hole. And I think Dortmund were in a terrible situation, so they probably got rid of one of their best managers that they could have done. Tuchel didn't get on very well with Mr. Watzke or Mr. Zorc, so he left. Then they brought in Peter Bosch, who wasn't first choice. Lucien Favre was, but he couldn't get out of his contract. I think it was see at Nice. It was at Nice, wasn't he? Yeah. There he couldn't get out of his contract for that, so they had to take in who was next, and Peter Bosz was the only available manager who could come straight away. So he was always a square peg in a round hole, and I think we saw his start to his Dortmund career. I think they were unbeaten until October, and they looked pretty good. But then everybody worked out how they could play. They were smashed by Tottenham, and then they were absolutely battered by Salzburg. That was a bad season for Dortmund, and I think now what we're seeing is Peter Bosz has found a little niche by Leverkusen, and he's got the freedom to do that. Simon Rolfes, as his sporting director, has allowed him that freedom. They also buy players that seem to fit his style. So yeah, he's delivering good goods, and whereby Leverkusen are at the minute, fifth. If you look at the clubs around them, you could probably argue that they could be fourth, but that would be dependent on how good Schalke are. Schalke are another good side. So I think for Bayer Leverkusen to be in the top six, that includes Dortmund, Leipzig, Gladbach, Schalke and Leverkusen, they're probably where they should be at the moment. So I think Peter Bosz has got Bayer Leverkusen playing well. I spoke to him prior to the Cologne game, where they got hammered away from home. But that was just after the game against Juventus. And I said to him, does he ever get tired of the fact that people say he doesn't really care about defence, because his whole mantra is if you score 3, we score 4. And sometimes that fails. Sometimes it's fantastic football to watch. And he mentioned that game against Juventus where they were beaten, but they certainly defended a lot better. And you're always going to get beaten by a team that's got as many stars in it as Juventus has on the world's biggest stage. And I could see where he was coming from. They did play really well that night. And if you look where they are, they have lost 6 games, but they've also drawn 5 of those games. So they've drawn a 5 on top of that. And some of them have been from games that look beyond them. And they've also had some great results like they did against Dortmund. I was at Leverkusen that night for that game. They played phenomenally well, real good performance. And yeah, Peter Bosz has got Bayer Leverkusen operating at their top level at the moment, and I think he'll be there for a couple of seasons. The only reason I could see him leaving there is if they were to finish around about 10th or 11th, which looking at the table now and looking at the way they played this season under Bosz, I can't see that happening. Maybe they were to lose a couple of players, they could, but Leverkusen are very good at getting replacements in.
Yeah. I have a broader question about the Bundesliga, but Joe, do you want to ask have you got any other questions about?
No, go for it. I'm looking forward to this.
No, I did want to just ask, because obviously there's been the trend of English players, young English, or not even English, young players from the UK, moving to the Bundesliga it's been a growing trend, and it's interesting how the Bundesliga has now been seen as kind of a finishing school for these kind of youngsters, whereas we've seen, I think Ollie Burke's now at Alaves in Spain. It's not, I mean, he's been getting games, but he's not quite had the development that maybe he'd have hoped. And, Patrick Roberts went to Girona, I think, was it last year or 2 years ago? It didn't quite work out for him there. So what do you think it is that makes the Bundesliga such a great development kind of school, if you like, for the likes of Ethan Ampadu or Ademola Lookman or even John Joe Kenny, like these kind of players? What is it about the Bundesliga that makes it such a kind of great finishing school for them?
I think to answer that question, you probably have to look at what German football has failed to produce through its own academy. And that is wide players who can attack at free will with real good skill, real good discipline. They're technically good on the ball. They're able to dribble at high speed, take on players. They can finish from any angle. They can, they can pick out a real, like Sancho and even John Joe Kenny can pick out a really good pass. And that's why Bundesliga clubs have gone shopping in England or in the UK, is because they don't have that ability in their own academy. They've got very good defenders. They've got very good central midfielders. They've had a problem with strikers, but if you look at what Timo Werner's doing now, he's a good striker, a good finisher of the ball. And they've got very good goalkeepers. They always have had. But what they haven't had and what they've failed to produce is exciting attacking wingers. And that's where, clubs in England, academies in England have been able to produce those players. And because of the cut and thrust of the Premier League, those players aren't getting time. I mean, Joe, you mentioned Phil Foden, fantastic player, could probably walk into, I would say, any other side apart from Manchester City or Liverpool at the minute. He could walk into a starting 11 side. And and he's not getting that. I think the only reason he's still there is because he's a big Manchester City fan and he knows he will get his time there if he's patient. But
when he's 29,
Jadon Sancho wasn't prepared to wait, and he went to Dortmund, and I think people forget he was drip fed into that side, and once he was ready, then he exploded into that side. He didn't hit the ground running straight away. He got 20 minutes here, 30 minutes there, but when he had those 20 or 30 minutes, he was exceptional. He was able to be given the confidence and the freedom, and I think that's something you get in the Bundesliga that you don't get in the Premier League, because everything is so tight in the Premier League, and managers' jobs are on the line week in, week out, that some managers can't afford to give. The Guardiola can, but some of the, like David Moyes, for instance, at West Ham, he can't afford to take a chance on someone like Phil Foden. He needs someone who can play Premier League football, and that's unfortunately where the academy guys and the youngsters haven't been getting the game time, and they've picked it up in Germany. I think it becomes a problem when German sides don't finish creating that style of player, because then they look at having to buy it in from England all the time. I think you said there, Josh, that it might be a bit of a finishing school. I think that becomes a problem if those players then go back. So if Sancho was to go back to City for 20 million, then it would be a finishing school. The fact that he could go to Manchester United for 120 million would probably argue the fact that Dortmund were right to get him at cut price and develop him.
Yeah, Joe, have you got any other questions really about German football or anything?
I mean, obviously, I follow German football religiously, as I do most of the European leagues, as you know. So, I mean, I have a clue what's going over there. But if you had to, a very basic question to end us off, but title winner 2019-20 Bundesliga season.
Behind closed doors, Bayern Munich. I think if we'd have gone full circle with crowds, I think Dortmund could have done it this season. I think they will miss playing in front of 86,000 people at Westfalenstadion. That will be a real game changer for them. I think Bayern Munich have got that quality where they'll just pass it around like it's a training game if there's no fans there. So for me, I think the table as it stands now, the top six, I think is pretty much as it'll finish should the games come back.
And actually, Joe, I've got a last question of my own. How do you reckon we'll get a season like this in the next few seasons of the Bundesliga? Like, how do you think this competitive season is set the standard? And do you think we're going to see more of these, like 5 teams, maybe 6, if Schalke really develop further under David Wagner? Do you reckon we're going to get more and more of a competitiveness back, like a really, top 6 kind of race for the title in future seasons?
I think it all depends. As I say, I think it all depends on transfers. Should Dortmund lose Jadon Sancho? Should Bayer Leverkusen lose Kai Havertz? Should Gladbach lose, any one of the 3 players that we talked about? That would be a problem for them, especially if Bayern Munich sign Sane. Then you've got teams around you getting depleted while the strongest is getting stronger. Should the squad stay the same and nobody loses anybody of key value, I think we could see it. I just think that maybe in a couple of seasons' time, we'll talk about football before this outbreak and we'll talk about it after this outbreak. As we go forward, I'd be interested to see if the Bundesliga is this competitive next season, especially if it's behind closed doors.
Yeah. Joe, did you want to say something?
I'd have been much more prepared to answer the question as to how it's going to be next year if we had the last 50 days or so of football to judge it off. I think this is often the point of a Bundesliga season where Bayern Munich habitually just steamroll the second half of the season, whereas clubs like Leipzig or Dortmund tend to fade away, especially in the context of a title battle. As for next year, I think it's largely dependent on transfers, but I'd also put emphasis on managers as well. Arguably, the fact that the Bundesliga was so close at the beginning of the season was due to Niko Kovac, great manager though he was, not really fitting the bill at Bayern Munich. Lucien Favre at Borussia Dortmund arguably didn't have the best start to the season either. There's an argument to say that Erling Braut Haaland is one of the main reasons they're back in that title battle. The question is, going into next year, it's not just about the players. Is Marco Rose going to be the great manager at Gladbach that he was this year? Is he going to have new ideas? Is Peter Bosz still going to be able to play that way at Bayern Leverkusen? Is, for example, David Wagner going to be able to use that effective 3-wing setup in that very defensive style at Schalke, is that going to be able to be played at the same level, or are other teams going to find them out? I can't really predict what it's going to be. I don't think we're going to have a season like this for the next 3 or 4 years, potentially. But if you're looking at the trajectory of European leagues, the Bundesliga is very much on its way up at the moment, because the quality of a league is not based on the team that wins it. It's based on the supporting cast. And this year, so many Bundesliga sides in the top 10 have risen to the occasion. It's been fantastic to watch. And honestly, I just want to see more German football this year, because we've been maybe robbed of a fantastic title battle.
I think you're spot on there. I think we have been robbed of a fantastic title battle. And also, I think Bayern Munich could have gone on and won the Champions League, especially when they played against Chelsea. I think they were really hurt last season by being knocked out by Liverpool. I think that really hurt them going out in the round of 16. Very unusual for Bayern to fall out that early. So, you mentioned there a key point, that Bayern Munich tend to start to kick into top gear at the business end of the season, which is now, and Hansi Flick have got them like purring, like a top level motor car, and I think they would have had a problem with Dortmund, but maybe seen it out. But now it's behind closed doors potentially. I think Bayern Munich's class will rise to the top, and they'll walk it.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating, and obviously the interest that this season has brought to the league has been tremendous. Obviously, with the competitiveness of those top teams. I think we're going to call it there. So my thanks to Joe for coming on as usual, and a special thank you to Chris Williams. Thank you so much for.
Hey, no problem. Enjoyed it.
2 hours of your time.
Hey, look, anytime it's normally on a Saturday I'd be like, I maybe could do half an hour, but obviously there's no football on at the minute. So
yeah. We've put your Twitter, I think, in the video description, but do you want to just plug it if you like?
Oh, if it's in the video description, it's in the video description. At the minute, you're not missing out on much. Pictures of my dogs, that's about it.
Yeah.
The content we need.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be it for us, guys, for this Saturday. We'll be back next Saturday, and we've got another interview as well on Wednesday. So just follow our socials. We'll plug it when it gets closer. But thanks for joining us, and have a good rest